November 17th, 1944. The cold Pacific night had just begun its silent sweep across the dark waters off the Bismarck Sea. Waves whispered against the hull of a submarine far below the surface, somewhere between the Torres Strait and the Solomon Islands. Inside, the men of Imperial Japanese Navy submarine Thufir 26 moved like shadows, faces drawn with fatigue, voices hushed, eyes fixed on instruments that charted their fate. Outside, unseen by most, the vast ocean waiting above was about to witness the ferocious effectiveness of a weapon the world had underestimated, a submarine designed by many measures to be economical, utilitarian, almost disposable. And yet, in its prowling hunts and torpedo strikes, this cheap vessel would sink far more tonnage than the strategists in Tokyo ever expected, and leave a mark on the war that few outside the torpedo crews would comprehend. I speak to you now not as a distant chronicler, but as one who has walked the decks of ghost submarines, who has traced the names on plaques and studied the patrolling logs long after the smoke cleared. I am here to unpick how a submarine, seemingly plain, not bristling with the technological mystique of bigger, costlier designs, carved its name into the ledger of naval history. If there's a whisper among submarine historians, it's that I-26, a Type B-1 submarine of the Imperial Japanese Navy, was not supposed to be one of the great predators. The Empire's naval doctrine, before and during World War II, prized decisive fleet battles and grand armadas, not the clandestine stalking, the lonely watch in the deep that submarine service demands. Yet I-26, built in Kure and launched in late 1940, would go on to become one of Japan's highest-scoring submarines in terms of tonnage sunk, more than many contemporaries, while remaining, in construction and operation, comparatively straightforward. Wikipedia. This is the mystery at the heart of our story. Why did this submarine, comparatively cheap, lean in design, not burdened with exotic equipment, destroy more ships than expected? What elements conspired to elevate this unassuming hunter into a lethal force beneath the waves? I invite you to descend with me into cold water and hotter history. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, submarine design in the 1930s and 1940s was an exercise in contradiction. On one hand, the Japanese understood the enormous distances of the Pacific and the need for reach. On the other, they remained wedded to the idea of decisive battles between fleets. This meant that submarines like the Type B-1, designed to be long-range, reliable, and capable of scouting as well as attacking, were conceived less as commerce raiders and more as the eyes and spears of a future great fleet engagement. But war, as ever, writes its own rules. I-26 was a product of that philosophy. At 108.7 meters long and displacing 2,584 tons surfaced, she was lean enough to slip through Allied patrol screens, swift enough, capable of 23.5 knots on the surface, and carried 6 533mm torpedo tubes with 17 torpedoes stowed deep in her hull and racks. A small reconnaissance float plane sat in a watertight hangar, ready to be catapulted into dawn skies, its mission to search beyond the horizon for unsuspecting prey. Wikipedia. Built for the vast Pacific, she was not coach-built like some wartime expedients. She was streamlined for range and endurance. Yet while expensive submarines and sweeping doctrines raged in admirals' minds, I-26 carved her legacy not through complexity, but through opportunity seized, and through the barren strategic landscape the war had laid bare. The early Pacific War saw Japanese submarines assigned often to fleet roles, shadowing enemy battle groups, observing, relaying positions. But beneath that noble purpose lay an uncomfortable truth: the vastness of the Pacific and the underdevelopment of Japanese anti-escort doctrine meant that often cargo ships and troop transports moved with minimal protection. Opportunity, more than strategy, became the hunter's friend. I-26's operational history reads like the score sheet of a lone wolf arriving early at a feast. On the 7th of December 1941, the very day the war erupted in the Pacific, she executed her first kill, sinking a 2,140 gross register ton merchant ship in the Pacific Ocean. Her patrols took her from the Aleutians to the hostile waters off Australia's eastern coast. She was the first Japanese submarine to strike an American merchant vessel early in the war, off the state of Washington, a grim herald that no coastline, no matter how distant, was beyond the reach of the silent killers beneath the waves. Wikipedia. But one of the most chilling hallmarks of I-26's career was her efficiency in tonnage sunk. By mid-war, she had accumulated more than 51,500 tons of enemy shipping sunk, making her one of the most successful Japanese submarines in terms of total tonnage destroyed. Wikipedia imagine the numbers behind that statement: freighters laden with fuel, supplies, and troops destined to fight on distant islands, tankers carrying oil vital to Japan's energy-starved war machine, warships themselves, each loss echoing back into the broader theater of conflict. And sink them she did. But the story of I-26 cannot be told without acknowledging the broader failure of the Japanese naval strategy. While proud of their Type B one-boats torpedoes, acknowledged in many analyses as reliable, even superior to Allied counterparts in early years, the Japanese High Command never fully embraced submarine warfare as a commerce sabotage tool. They kept their best boats tied to scouting roles for fleet engagements that rarely came, diverting precious effort away from cutting Allied supply lines. War History Online contrasts this with the Allied submarine campaign. American submarines alone sank well over 1,000 Japanese merchant vessels throughout the war, accounting for more than half of all Japanese shipping losses, effectively strangling the supply arteries of an empire built on imported resources. McGregor is history. But while the Allies achieved this through a strategic doctrine, Japan's submarine force flared intensely in select instances, like I-26, without ever cohering into a unified, war-winning strategy. And yet, here lies the paradox. Even in a doctrinally unfocused force, I-26 arose as a standout, an almost accidental predator. Consider the psychological impact of such a vessel on both sides. Among Allied sailors, the whisper of a Japanese submarine in patrol reports, radio intercepts, or convoy planning induced tension and cautious routing. Friendly escorts tightened screens and sonar sweeps. Fuel shipments were rerouted, and the specter of unseen torpedoes under midnight seas weighed heavily on merchant crews. Conversely, within the Japanese submarine crews themselves, tales of I-26's successes became folklore, proof that beneath the waves, heart and tenacity could overcome strategic ambiguity. This human side, the fear and paranoia of unseen threats, cannot be overstated. Imagine being an Allied merchant captain bracing through tropical storms, your hull creaking, knowing that somewhere below, a steel coffin with a torpedo room hungers for your keel. The tension was palpable. The silence of the sonar pings became as loud and dire as gunfire. Yet for all that 26 and boats like her achieved, the Allies adapted. American anti-submarine doctrine improved, air patrols tightened, and new technologies like radar and depth charges began to corral the once elusive submarines. By late 1944, many of Japan's submarines were lost, hunted by the very fleets they once unsettled. I-26 herself met her end in November 1944, sunk in waters thick with Allied patrols. Her career, though impactful, was a brief flash in the relentless tide of war. Wikipedia. In the cold calculus of history, what then do we make of a submarine like I-26? She was not cheap in the strictest sense. No submarine of that era was inexpensive. But in comparative effectiveness, per unit cost and per operational opportunity, she delivered far more impact than Japanese planners anticipated. Her design was not revolutionary. Her doctrine was imperfect. And yet, she proved that under certain circumstances, when met with a foe stretched thin across oceans, when the traditional strategic focus faltered, when necessity or instinct drove commanders to seize targets of opportunity, even a submarine built within the constraints of a flawed strategy could outpunch expectations. Seen in that light, I-26 serves as a mirror to wartime innovation. That effectiveness is not always born of grand strategy or high technology alone. Sometimes it is carved out by circumstance, by bold patrols, by the raw grit of crews who dared to linger where others feared to go. So, next time the history of submarine warfare is recounted, remember not just the tonnage figures or the tables of doctrine, but the flickering lantern light on a submarine's darkened bridge as she surfaces under starlight, the ocean a sheet of ink, and the sense, sharpened by hunger and purpose, that somewhere out there, fate is about to be unleashed in a hail of torpedoes. That, in essence, is why this cheap Japanese submarine destroyed more ships than expected, because war, in its darkest corners, rewards those who learn to hunt where others only seek.